Hey guys, and welcome to today's episode. I am really pumped to have one of my colleagues and friends on the show. And I've actually been wanting her to come on for a while because she has a very fascinating story. And especially for those of you that are on the path of trying to get pregnant and, fertility issues are abounding. I think today's episode is going to be very helpful for you because as we know, and I'm sure you know, that there's so many sort of different options out there, and we don't always know which way to go. And we also hit a lot of dead ends. And today's guest definitely had that happen for her. So her name is Ashley Looft, and she's a functional nutritional therapy practitioner who helps women experiencing fertility and cycle struggles dig deep to find the root of their struggles and uses nutrition, supplements, and lifestyle to support their bodies in healing so that they can live their most happy, healthy, and fertile life. She came to this work through her own struggles with PCOS, endometriosis, and 4 pregnancy losses. Ashley was tired of going to the doctor and being told that her only options were the pill or to get pregnant. So she decided to take matters into her own hands and apprenticed with Nicole Jardim to become a women's health coach, and then continued on to go to school for nutritional therapy. When Ashley is not working to help others, she loves to spend time with her husband and 2 dogs, traveling, reading, cooking, running, and hiking in the beautiful Arizona desert. You can find her online at wholehealthyhappylife.com. That'll be in the notes for easy access, or on social media at Whole Healthy Happy Life. Welcome, Ashley.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you are here. And I'm so excited for you to share your story with people because I think your story definitely um, is one that a lot of women can relate to in dealing with sort of several levels of hormonal dysregulation, right?
Yeah.
So I know that you had PCOS, right? And is that kind of where things got started?
Yeah, so things really got started after my second loss.
Mm,
So I had a miscarriage, um, and and then about 9 months later, I had a second miscarriage, and that's when I decided, okay, this isn't normal. Like
mm,
there has to be something going on, and started digging into like how do I support my fertility. I was already kind of into doing things more naturally, and especially with food and that sort of thing. And so I just started researching and came across the Fertility Friday podcast actually,
mm-hmm.
and so she's a wonderful resource, especially if you're trying to learn how to track your cycles, to know what's going on with your periods and your ovulation. Um, and that's kind of what made me realize, oh, well, my cycles are really long and that's not
Mm.
normal.
Mm. Wow, and
And
that's the first time that kinda, like,
yeah,
yeah, was made obvious. Mhm.
yeah, I had never like I never knew. Well, honestly, like until we started trying to get pregnant, I never even paid attention to my periods. Like
Mm, mhm.
most of the time, I had no idea when they were gonna come. When I was in high school, like I went in whole summer without any period, and my mom was
Mm.
like, "What's going on? Like that's not normal."
Right.
I was
You're
like,
like, "I'm
"Oh,
fine, it's great." You're like, "I didn't have to deal with
yeah."
it, perfect." Yeah.
Yeah, so then from basically from that point until almost until I got married, I was on the pill off and on for years.
Mm,
And
mhm.
so just didn't even care or realize that my period was even important.
Yeah.
um so yeah, so I realized that they were really long, and then I went on a search to find a doctor who could help me, because I went to a few different doctors, and a lot of them were just like, well, you know, there isn't a lot we can do, which just
Mhm.
like doesn't make sense.
I know.
Yeah, they're just
So
like, just go
frustrating,
on
right?
the pill or get pregnant, and that's like your only answer. And I'm just like, that can't be the only answer. There has to be more to this. Um, and so I searched for like a functional medicine OBGYN, which didn't exist
Yeah.
here, at least
It
in
ba it
Phoenix.
it barely exists now, I
Excuse
mean,
me.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so that's how I stumbled upon a NAPRO OBGYN, which we can talk about a little bit later.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, and that's when they ran a ton of tests, had 15 vials of blood taken, which is
Wow. A lot.
so
Like in
much.
one sitting?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. I mean, you and I both run MRTs on our clients, and like they can freak out by the 4 vials that are in there,
Hmm.
I can't imagine 15.
Yeah.
I don't think my
Yeah. It
body would do
just
that at this
it kept
point.
going. I was just like, oh my goodness, how many more do you have to do?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So yeah, I mean, because they ran every test under the sun because
Yeah.
I'd had multiple miscarriages, and the
How
results
old were
came back.
you? How old were you at this time? Do you remember?
I was 29.
Okay. So you were young.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we had been trying for a year, had 2 miscarriages. So they did that, and the results came back with basically if all the miscarriage stuff came back, like nothing was wrong, the typical things that they test for in terms of genetics and that sort of thing, and then blood clotting
Mm.
factors.
Mhm.
So all of that stuff came back normal, but they did say, oh, well, your androgens and things show that you have PCOS.
Okay.
So
And is
that's how
that the
I
first time you
finally,
heard that?
yeah, that was
Yeah.
the first time I had, well, no, because I think I had read their Bryden's book by then.
Okay.
Um, so I had heard of it, but I just assumed that I didn't have it. I don't know why. I was
Mm.
just like, I don't have any of these things. I guess I was in denial.
Yeah, I mean, we've all been there. It's like it's either or, right? Either I like have everything or none of that's happening to me.
Yeah.
Both of which are kind of denial. Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, so I was just like, okay, well, I have PCOS then.
Mhm.
And that's when I was like, okay, now what do I do? So
Mhm.
of course my doctor at first suggested that I, um, work on blood sugar stuff, which my fasting, insulin, and glucose and everything really wasn't even um, that concerning, especially
Mm.
for a traditional doctor.
Mhm.
But they still just assume like PCOS equals you need to be on metformin.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I was just like, I'm not taking this. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know that I necessarily have blood sugar dysregulation issues, and like I just no.
Yeah.
I'm not taking this
You're like, I'm
medication.
good.
So he was just like, okay, well then either like if you come back in 3 months and you've lost 10 pounds, then I won't bug you about it anymore.
Oh, of course, they went the weight loss route.
Right?
Mhm.
Which
Mhm.
I weighed like 130
Oh my
something.
goodness. Yeah.
At 5'3", like not anywhere near overweight.
No.
Like
Yeah.
weight isn't even an issue here.
Yeah.
Um, is
They
yeah,
always make it that way.
yeah. And so, but I did it because I had for the longest time been lighter.
Mhm.
So I was just like, well, this will just be my motivation to lose the weight
Mm.
because, as women,
Mhm.
we're constantly told we need to be a certain way anyway. So I was
Mhm.
just like, okay, I'm going to do it.
Mhm.
And I did,
Mhm.
but it didn't help.
I was gonna say it may have made things worse, right?
Probably. Yeah. So I just continued to still have like 45-day length cycles where I don't ovulate until I was like at day 30. So
Mm.
I was happy that I ovulated, but I still felt like this is just so late in my cycle to be
Mhm.
ovulating.
Mhm.
Um, so I tried that. Then I decided to apprentice with Nicole Jardim and I
Mhm.
learned more. And I started to really start learning more about like gut health and how our diet can affect our hormones and all that kind of stuff. And so, like, I did some Whole30s, and a couple of times when I would do something like a Whole30 or work really hard on my gut health, I would have a shorter cycle.
Mm.
And I was
Mhm.
just like, this has to be it. And so I continued to try and learn more, went back to school to get a certificate in nutrition to learn more about how to help people with nutrition, including myself,
Mm-hmm.
and really started digging further into the whole gut health thing. And um, finally decided, okay, I need to do some testing. And so um, I went to a local practitioner who offered a different. It's not the GI map. It's from Avexia, and I can't remember what they
One
call
of the other
theirs.
stool analysis. Yeah.
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 And so I went through that, um, and so then my results basically were just dysbiosis,
Mm-hmm.
and not very surprised by that.
Mm-hmm.
And she just suggested, because there was one thing that came out that was more of a pathogenic type of bacteria, and she's like, well, take this antibiotic. And
Oh, okay.
normally I wouldn't be, but because it was like pathogenic, I was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, like
Yeah.
let's try this. And I
Yeah.
did that, and I took a ton of gut healing supplements and tried all this stuff. And again, I had like 2 cycles in a row that were shorter in length,
Mm-hmm.
around 30 days. And so I was like, okay, I found it. And then had like a 50 something day cycle
Oh
after that. I was like,
no.
okay, this isn't it. And
Yeah.
so I just kind of kept trying all of these things. I tried taking VTEX, I tried taking this, I tried taking that, and nothing ever seemed to help me long term.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when my doctor had brought in a new doctor from who had just finished her, what is it called? Not a rotation, but she had just finished studying at the main hospital in Nashville, or not
Mm-hmm.
Nashville, I'm sorry, Nebraska,
Mm-hmm.
um, for their NAPRO, which is natural reproductive, um, or natural procreative technology is what NAPRO stands for.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a Catholic based medical practice.
Interesting.
Yes. So if
Wow.
you're triggered by religion, this may not be the best for
Good
you.
for you. Yeah.
And I get it. I personally have found certain religious things somewhat triggering in
Yeah.
my past,
Yeah.
and so I totally understand if you feel like, whoa, they're Catholic,
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. Can be
But at
intense.
the same time, I have never been pressured about like my religion or anything when I've gone there. They've always just sort of been like, well, do you have a spiritual practice? That's usually what they ask, is if you have a
Mm-hmm.
spiritual practice, and you're like, yes, this is what I believe and this is what I do. And then they're like, okay, like they
Mm-hmm.
just,
They let you do your thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
um,
That's just so
and
fascinating. You just don't think of, a religious based thing necessarily being on sort of the cutting edge scientifically, right? So I always find it
yes.
fascinating when you hear that. And I was raised Catholic, so it's just fascinating when I hear about like Catholic things that don't, even though obviously Catholics like babies and babies to be born, right? So that part
Yes.
doesn't surprise me, but that sort of cutting edge technology aspect is, yeah, pretty fascinating.
Yeah. So yeah, I was raised Catholic as well.
Mm.
So I definitely was kind of like, well, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason why they are so cutting edge and more on the natural side is because they don't believe in birth control.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So because the Catholic faith is like generally anti-hormonal birth control,
Yeah.
like they had to find other ways to A, help people who are having cycle problems, and
Mm-hmm.
B, they also don't believe in IVF.
Mm,
Um,
right.
so they
I
had
didn't
to
think about
help
that.
find other ways to help women get pregnant rather than having to go through IVF.
Right. Fascinating.
So
I
as
love
much
how
as
like things like, it's like we think of something in a certain way and it's in this box. And then, like other things that are so forward moving like IVF, and nothing against IVF, and it's helped a lot of women, but
Mhm.
it's this thing because it's in this box and it doesn't fit with this other thing. It's going to find this like roundabout other way. and tap it. Like, it kind of reminds me, I years ago heard about Cuba basically having the most amazing system of organic food in the world because the US cut off access to pesticides, like in the embargoes or whatever it's called. So Cuba just could not get any pesticides and different chemicals. And so they basically had to figure out how to really do everything organically and, make it thrive. And so now, in the past 20 years or whatever, however long we've been able to get in there, people go and study their system because they had to create that. So I find it fascinating with the NAPRO.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
totally.
tell me more about that.
Yes. So they've done a lot of research in trying to figure out what they can do to help women more naturally. And one of the things they use is called the Creighton Method, which is a certain way of charting your cycle and your cervical mucus.
Okay.
And they you bring in your chart, and the doctor can look at it and pick out like hormonal imbalances and other things just based on your
Mm,
cervical mucus patterns, which is super cool.
fascinating.
Right?
Okay, so I'm gonna interrupt 1 second because I don't wanna forget this, question. I'm curious about in terms of temperature, in your luteal phase, if it is will it drop? So, for those that don't know, it goes higher in the luteal phase because of progesterone. Will it drop when women's progesterone drops? So say you have an early drop of progesterone in your luteal
Mhm.
phase. Do you know if that shows up in your temperature or not?
Yes,
Okay.
because I personally have that problem.
Okay. So you actually see that on because
Yeah.
yeah.
And that was like the one piece of the puzzle that I still haven't figured out to this day is why I don't produce enough progesterone.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
I have a like luteal phase defect. I think it's like defect 3 or something. I don't know. There's like
mhm,
3 different ways that you can have a
mhm,
defect. So I go up high. So mid cycle, I reach high enough, but
mhm.
then it just like tanks
Tanks.
immediately.
Yeah.
Um, which was one of the things that we suspect was leading to some of my miscarriage
Miscarriages.
issues.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
And so I did see like that
That
sort of,
happening.
it would go up to like 98.5
Mhm.
in the morning, and then it would drop down to like 98.1 for the rest, and just kind of stayed barely above 98, which I
Mm.
knew, like, for me personally, after 3 years of charting, like below 98, like in the 97s was always like, that's 97.6 to like 97.9 was always where I was in my follicular phase.
Mm,
And then once I
mhm.
got above that 98, like except for rare occasions with sleep issues or whatever, like I knew immediately, oh, I
Mm.
ovulated.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
that's just where
Yeah, yeah.
where I am.
And that's what's so cool about charting, right? And charting over the long term is you really get to see your numbers. And for me, I've definitely seen my numbers shift as my thyroid gets better, as I do work on my
Mhm.
thyroid because, I didn't take my temperature ever before the past couple years and getting into all of this stuff. But really seeing, I was in the like 96s during my follicular phase, like I
Mhm.
don't even remember if I was getting into 97 during follicular. And then, luteal, I would get into 90. But now it's awesome because I'm like, okay, I'm in the night, I may be 97.2, 97.3, but I'm in the 97s for follicular and then hop into the 98s mostly for my luteal. And it's just like, yay. So for those that don't know, that's another, awesome thing about tracking your cycle is that you can see how your thyroid is doing.
Mhm.
So yeah, a little aside there.
Yeah. So, yeah, so he brought in a new doctor who had just finished her fellowship. That was the word I was looking
Yes,
for
I was
earlier.
trying to think of. I was like, I know there's a word for it, but
In Omaha, and she was specifically studying surgical procedures to help women, particularly with endometriosis and PCOS.
okay.
So this was like basically going to solve two of my problems, which
Mhm.
was super exciting.
Mhm.
Um, so she, one, told me, well, I've more recently done research and everything into how to identify endometriosis and all of this stuff. And I knew that how my doctor originally had done the surgery for my endometriosis prior to this wasn't the best way.
Mhm. And when did you have the surgery for endo?
I had it after my third miscarriage.
Okay. Is that when you found out that you had endometriosis or yeah.
Yes.
So it was
It was,
exposure.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was always sort of something that I considered was a possibility because my mom had endometriosis and I always had really painful periods.
Mhm.
But I just, like, it was never, I don't know, I just never, I guess, had a doctor say, well, let's do something about this. And
Mhm.
so I just didn't,
Mhm.
despite the fact that my periods were so painful that occasionally, like, I would wake up in the middle of the night crying and
Mhm.
like all of these things that are totally not normal.
I know. But we're just told that it's normal, right? Yeah.
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 So, so he was like, I really think you should consider getting surgery for endometriosis. So he did the ablation procedure where they go in and burn off the endometriosis, which isn't the best way to do it. So I was really excited when he had brought in this new practitioner, and she was like, well, I actually do excision. And one of the things that they do is after they excise, they sew it shut.
Mm.
Um, so that
Okay.
way you have less scar tissue
Oh,
because you don't
fascinating.
just have like an open wound
Right.
inside,
Right.
like they sew it together,
Gotcha.
which is
So
really cool.
can you explain just for those that don't know really what ablation is versus the excision surgery?
Yeah, so ablation is they go in and they use a laser to just sort of burn off the endometriosis. This works if you have very surface level
Mhm.
endometriosis, but you have deep infiltrating endometriosis that goes deep into the tissues. Then it only gets the surface part of the endo and doesn't remove all of it. So you still can wind up with a lot of pain and
Mhm.
other inflammation from your endometriosis. So excision is they either take a surgical tool or they can even use a laser, which they did in my
Mm.
case, and they burn it and cut it with
Mhm.
the laser
So it's kinda like
out.
they're kinda digging into
Hmm.
the uterus, right? And kinda digging it out.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
So, and it can be what I really was interested also is she's talked about like all the other different places that it can be. It can be
Mhm.
on your bowel, it can be on
Mhm.
your diaphragm. So there's a lot of different places in your abdominal cavity that your endometriosis
Mhm.
can grow on. It doesn't necessarily only grow on your uterus and
Right.
ovaries.
Right. And quick question, when it is on your bowels, they can't really do that excision surgery, right? Or
It
can
de-
they?
they can, and
Okay.
it depends
Okay.
basically
Mhm.
on the situation and how bad it is.
Mhm.
Um, if another thing that she mentioned that made me go, oh, she really knows what she's talking about is she talked about, well, at the surgery that I'm planning right now, I'm not able to get like a gastrointestinal surgeon in there with me or a team
Mm.
of other surgeons. But if I do find it on your bowel and I'm not able to remove it fully because you would need some sort of resection, um, then we would go back in at a later date with someone who
Knows how
does
to do
bowel
that.
surgery.
Mhm.
Yes. And so I was just like, oh, again, she
Yeah.
really knows her stuff because
Yeah.
it's really important. So you want someone who knows that they may need to bring in a team of surgeons when
Absolutely.
they're going in there, or at least knows like, oh, I would refer you to someone else if this came up.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. Because, I talked about this recently in a presentation. One of the most common mishaps that will happen with gynecological surgeries is some kind of nicking of the intestines. And, in that case, when you do have to remove anything from the intestines, the, endometrial tissue, then absolutely it's very easy to cut into it. And then if somebody doesn't know what they're doing, doesn't see that, etc., sews you back up, suddenly you have, all kinds of good stuff dumping into your abdominal cavity like I did,
Yeah, and
sepsis and
sepsis
whatever.
and
Yeah. And so definitely not a good thing. And that's I'm glad you brought up that point, because this is like, if you have issues, if you have endometriosis, if you're going in and getting gynecological surgeries, really talking to your surgeon about all these things and understanding these things. And like you said, you were so impressed by her because she understood that need for the whole team. And so if your surgeon doesn't kind of get that bigger picture, time to keep looking for another surgeon.
yep, definitely. Yeah. And so that was the first part. So I was really excited. I was like, awesome, because I still was having really painful periods. So I didn't think that they had gotten on the endometriosis the first time
Mhm.
anyways.
Mhm.
So I was excited to have that done. And then the second thing that she introduced me to, which I had never heard of before, was an ovarian wedge resection.
Mhm.
So I had talked to her along with my other doctor about how I had basically tried everything under the sun that I could find to help with my PCOS and shortening my cycles.
Mhm.
And nothing was working. I had done acupuncture, I had done low carb, I had lost weight, I had done gut healing, and just nothing ever seemed to help permanently
Mhm.
in a sense. And so she said, well, we have this surgery called an ovarian wedge resection. And what happens? And she's like, I think you're a really good candidate because your ovaries are enlarged.
Mm.
So, women with PCOS, the polycystic ovary part, you can have that or you may not have that. It's not necessarily a requirement for PCOS. The
Mhm.
bigger thing I think with PCOS is more like the hormonal imbalance issues.
Mhm.
Um, but I did have polycystic ovaries, and then my ovaries just always. She told me we have plenty of ultrasounds showing how over enlarged your ovaries are. They were like 2 to 3
Mm.
times the size of a normal ovary.
Wow. And is that
Yeah.
from the PCOS?
And that's one of the things that I had asked. And she's like, honestly, I don't know.
Hmm.
Like, is it the chicken or the egg?
Right.
Is sort of what she said. She's like, are your ovaries enlarged because you have hormonal imbalances and inflammation, or were they always enlarged and
Mhm.
that's what's causing your hormonal imbalances?
Mm.
We don't know.
Right.
Um,
Like, okay.
and I was just like, well, since I've done all of these things to try and correct my hormonal imbalances and reduce inflammation and everything else, and none of it has helped,
Mhm.
perhaps I just need to break the cycle.
Yeah.
And um, and so what they do during an ovarian wedge resection is they take your ovary, and so it's like it's roundish,
Mhm. Mhm.
kind of like a ball, kind
Mhm.
of a little bit more lumpy.
Mhm.
And they cut out like a pie wedge
Mm.
um, from it, and then they sew it back together to make it smaller.
Okay.
And
Okay.
yes,
That makes sense. It's funny when as you've been saying wedge, and when I had read that, it's so funny because I think about this wedge that I had to like sleep on after my surgeries, and I'm like,
mhm.
what do they do? Like, how do they wedge out your ovaries?
Yeah, yeah. So they cut out like a little wedge
That's so
and
interesting.
then sew it back together. And so I decided to go ahead and go with it. I had waited another couple months, tried a few other things, and was just
Hmm.
like, still isn't working.
Yeah.
Um, and so we discussed it with my husband, and I made the decision to go ahead with the surgery. And I am so glad that I did.
Mm.
So during the time that I was considering it, I did a ton of research on it, which actually there isn't a whole lot out there,
Yeah.
especially more recent.
Hmm.
Um, But this surgery has actually been around for a really long time. I think since like the 20s or something.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so it's been something that had been done in the past for women who were having hormonal issues. And it had a really good track record even back then of like 50 to 60% of women after having it started to have regular periods again.
Oh,
And
yeah.
especially for women who were on the leaner side. And I personally don't like the term lean PCOS. And I think it would be better if we just started saying like non-insulin resistant PCOS.
Yeah.
And so if that's you, if insulin resistant isn't your main contributor to your PCOS, then you're more likely to see better results from this surgery, is
Gotcha.
basically what the research says.
Gotcha. And essentially in these people, the ovaries are too large. Like that's kind of the thing that's happening. So this is more common maybe than we realize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Fascinating.
so yeah, so it had been around for a really long time. The only downfall to this is the scar tissue aspect of if things
Mhm.
get overly scarred or you get adhesions, then it could disrupt your ovary from actually being able to work properly.
Right, right.
And that's something that the NAPRO fellowship was looking at, the surgical fellowship that she was doing was working on better techniques on how to sew your ovary back up to prevent scarring as
Minimal
much as
scar tissue.
possible. Hmm.
Scar tissue is like the bane of every surgery. Like it really is. It's what can cause the most issues over the long term. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was just like, okay, well, it definitely seems like a good sort of um, yeah, it definitely seems like a good idea. And so I did it, and literally like immediately after I started having shorter cycles,
Wow.
my
So they
first
only
cycle,
did they do it to both ovaries or just one ovary?
she did it to both
Okay.
ovaries. It was a little bit harder on one ovary, she said, because it had like a larger cyst on it.
Mm,
Um, and and so that was kind of rough for her, I think.
mm.
But they did it to both ovaries, and yeah, it was amazing. I'm going to look up how long my cycles were because I went from 45 to like 50 something day cycles and immediately started to see a huge difference. So I actually had this done a little over a year ago, so
Oh, okay.
January of 2020.
Oh, very recently.
Yes. Um,
Pre-pandemic.
I
You got
know.
right in there.
Who knew? Right? So, yeah, so my first cycle afterwards was 26 days.
Wow.
The next cycle was 34 days, and then 29 days, and then after then 35 days, but it was all just like within what we consider a normal healthy cycle length, which was super
Yes.
exciting
After
for
never
me.
having that in your life, really,
Yes.
right? Except for like
Yes.
sporadic random times.
Mhm.
Um, so did your period start pretty much like the next month? Like, did you skip a month or anything after your surgery, or did it
So
come right away?
the fascinating thing was is she said that when she was in there, she was like, either you are about to ovulate or you just ovulated.
Mm.
Um, and so I was like, all right, well, I guess we'll see in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you?
um, and yeah, I did. I
Wow.
had just ovulated, so literally like 14 days after
Because
the surgery, I had my period. Yeah.
wow, that's amazing, right? I mean, I lost my period for 3 or 4 months after my surgeries. And given I lost a lot of weight and, whatever, it was a lot of trauma and couldn't eat and stuff for a while, but still, that's pretty amazing that like they go in there and actually work on your ovaries and you didn't skip a period, you know, that your body
Yeah.
still is like, let's do this. You already
Yeah,
ovulated. Let's just let it go.
I think I must have ovulated like the night before my surgery.
Yeah. Yeah. So your body's like, we're already through that part of the process. Just going to let it go now.
Yeah.
Wow. Fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then how long was it until you ended up getting pregnant?
Um, I was, I don't know, so I had the surgery in January and I got pregnant in September.
Okay.
Um, but I mean, we kind of tried like the first few cycles
Mm-hmm.
after we were allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
And then I decided to take the RWS gut
Mm-hmm.
health course
Mm-hmm.
because I was still having painful periods. And I was just like,
Mm. Yeah, you're like, come on, I did the surgery. Like, what in the
yes.
world?
I was just, yeah. So I was like, I must not have gotten everything. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, there must be something missing from the protocol I did to try and work on my gut health. And so I did a full 12-week gut healing protocol
Mm-hmm.
based on everything that I learned. And so obviously we weren't trying then because you shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
when you're taking
Mm-hmm.
eradicating
Mm-hmm.
supplements. So FYI everyone, don't want to harm your baby.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah.
um and so yeah, so we stopped during that time, and then within 2 cycles per um post protocol we were
Mm,
pregnant the second cycle.
that's
So
amazing.
yeah, and what makes it even more incredible
Mm-hmm.
is not only was it so quickly after I finally kind of got all of the things in line.
Mm-hmm.
I was cycling regularly,
Mm-hmm.
and I had gotten rid of the inflammation like midway through my protocol. I stopped having painful periods, and that was amazing. Like
It's amazing.
literally zero pain periods, like
Wow. Right. For the
none.
first time in your life. Yeah.
Yes.
That's incredible.
So that was super exciting. But I also, one of my losses was an ectopic pregnancy, and I lost my right fallopian tube.
Mm,
And so I'm one tube down.
wow. You're like, I'm one tube down. I still got pregnant.
Yes. Yeah,
What's
I'm
up?
one tube down and still in 2 cycles got pregnant. Um, and I ovulated from the right side that's missing the tube. I
Wow.
Yeah. So if you are out there and you're missing a fallopian tube and you're concerned, you can still get
To get
pregnant even
pregnant.
if you ovulate from the opposite side.
So how did you know which side you ovulated from?
When they did the ultrasounds during the early part of pregnancy, because they were checking,
Mm,
they can
they
see
can
which
see.
side has the luteal cyst.
Gotcha. Ah, so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So, which I had, because of my history, I had like 3 ultrasounds during the first trimester, like
Right,
every other week, just
right.
to,
Check on things and make sure everybody
yeah.
was okay. So when they did the wedge resection, did they also do some cleaning up of endometriosis too?
Yeah, so
Mhm.
she did all of that. Plus, she checked to make sure that my left tube was still open.
Mm,
Um, she had found like a small fibroid, I think it was in my abdomen, and had cut that off. My left ovary actually had adhesed to the back of my uterus, so she like
mm-hmm.
detached that. She did like a ton of cleanup in
Cleanup
there.
work. Yeah.
Yeah,
How long was your surgery? Do you know?
I think 4 or 5 hours.
Okay.
It was
Yeah.
pretty long because
Yeah.
she did a lot.
All that
'Cause
cleanup takes
yeah,
time. I mean, it's this cutting through the scar tissue, I know with any kind of intestinal surgery, that's what takes up the most of the time is,
yeah,
just because they have to be careful and it gets everywhere.
yeah.
Once you've had something done. Yeah. Wow. So how has your pregnancy been? You're about 5 months in.
Yeah, so it's been, I mean, outside of the normal
Hmm.
complaints, it's been
Hmm.
good.
Hmm.
Like I said earlier, progesterone is the one thing that we still haven't figured out. I still was
Hmm.
having low progesterone, so I supplement with progesterone.
Hmm.
Um, But outside of that, like, it's been great. I haven't really had any spotting. I haven't had
Nice.
any issues, which has been sort of like almost a godsend
Yeah,
because
absolutely. All
like
the
after this
PTSD of
mhm,
multiple miscarriages. I mean,
yeah.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
so it's been awesome. And everything's working good and we're having a little girl in June and we're really excited.
That's amazing. Have they told you, that they'll probably keep you on progesterone the whole time, or just kind of checking and see?
Yeah, so we just sort of keep checking. So we were definitely through all of the first trimester, and they checked a couple of times to make sure that I had a correct dose, to make sure it was high enough.
Hmm.
Like towards the very beginning, I was originally just taking it at night, and they added a second
Hmm.
dose in the morning.
Hmm.
Um, so now that the placenta has technically taken over, um, I just take it at night because even with your placenta doing most of the work, it was still on the lower side
Hmm.
end of where it should be. And so they're
Hmm.
like, well, we'll just keep
Keep
having
going.
you supplement.
Well, I've
So,
heard, and I feel like it's something that's not talked about enough, but I've heard that it can be very helpful for a lot of women to actually take progesterone the whole time, especially if you've had any kind of miscarriages,
mhm.
it just issues maintaining pregnancy in the past that for the most part, I mean, obviously you want to check and see where your hormone levels are at, not just like willy nilly, but for the most part, it just helps to have a successful pregnancy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's cool that's I don't feel like that's always even thought about by a lot of doctors.
Yeah, yeah. So that's been another nice thing about having an echo doctor
Hmm.
is they have been much more aware of sort of the fertility supporting things that you can do.
Hmm.
And especially with progesterone, where some doctors like I'm on several like support groups like on
Hmm.
Facebook and stuff, and women are like, my doctor refuses to even test my progesterone, and I'm
Right.
like, go find another doctor,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah.
Like, that's terrible. Like, I know it's not always the fix,
Right.
but if it's low, like, it's something you can do.
Yep.
And
And it's a huge concern to the pregnancy, right? Like it
yeah,
definitely, we know that it can terminate a pregnancy if you don't have enough. So yeah,
yeah.
check it. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So is that a national organization, NAPRO then?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So there are, they're located around the country. The best thing you can do is just like Google
Mm-hmm.
NAPRO OBGYN and see if anything comes up. There are both like practitioners and OBGYNs.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you don't have an OBGYN near you, you might have a practitioner who can at least help with some of the hormonal imbalance aspects in
Mm-hmm.
terms of looking at your charts and cycles and helping you that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, so that's really nice. And it may or may not be someone who is only trained in like the charting aspect, or
Mm-hmm.
there could also be physician's assistants who are trained in NAPRO and they can do a little bit more, obviously, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like being able to prescribe certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so
Or is the one you're working with there in Phoenix or?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, they're actually located in Gilbert, which is a suburb of Phoenix, if you're
Okay.
not familiar with the
Gotcha.
area. But yeah,
Gotcha. Well, it's so awesome to hear the story, and I feel like um, there is a big jump often to IVF these days. And again, nothing wrong with that, if that's the path. I mean, I've seen it work for several friends and obviously a lot of women out there. But I think it's important to know these other possible avenues too, right?
yeah, and it's
Especially like like when you're in your early 30s, and it should be you're at a place where it shouldn't be such a big deal because you have enough eggs and things like that, right? To go around. So
mhm.
yeah, thank you for sharing the story because I think I'll probably like me, I'd never heard of it before. I'm sure a lot of women haven't heard about it before, and just having more options to choose from is always a good thing.
Yeah, and IVF is so expensive.
Exactly.
So
It's not an
if you
option for
aren't
everybody.
yeah,
Yeah.
if you aren't ready to make that leap or it's not an option for you, the reason we chose not to and I
Mhm.
wanted to search one was because like I did always want to try and do things more naturally, but
Mhm.
two, because we could get pregnant. We had
Mhm.
gotten pregnant
Right.
several times and lost it. And I was like, well, IVF isn't going to help with that part.
Right. It's gonna get you
like,
pregnant. Yeah, yeah, but it's not gonna maintain the pregnancy.
so I was just like, this just doesn't like seem like it would be a good investment for us because
Yeah,
it just doesn't seem to be the answer for the recurrent loss aspect that I was having.
absolutely.
So
That's amazing. And you don't have to, like, you're not concerned with like bed rest or anything like that with this pregnancy at this point. That's
no,
awesome too.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Outside of the first trimester when I just felt like crap.
Mhm. Mhm.
um, so once I started feeling better, like I've been working out and haven't had any issues, which
Nice.
has been amazing because fear of exercise has been something I've dealt with throughout like my fertility journey.
For
Just
sure.
because after my first loss, I had literally gone for a run that morning, and it wasn't like a long or a hard
Mm.
run, like less than 3 miles, but it was enough to make me go, oh my gosh, did I cause
Right,
this?
right, right. And I think a lot of women probably go to that place, even though it
Mhm.
probably ultimately has nothing to do with it. But that's so great, to hear that. And you work with women on their fertility issues, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So you kind of take this approach with women around doing gut healing, and I know you know lots about fertility, even if they don't go the NAPRO route, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Just here to support you no matter what route you take. NAPRO, IVF, just completely naturally don't want to involve doctors.
Hmm.
It all, yeah.
Sweet. Yeah. So you guys check out her site if you need some help in this area of your life. I really do see this a lot. Um, Women that do some of that gut cleaning up definitely, have an easier time of getting pregnant if they were struggling before. So
Hmm.
it's just really a good idea whether if you're struggling or not to get pregnant. I feel like doing some gut cleaning in the 3 months before you start trying to get pregnant. It's just going to be good for your baby too,
Yeah.
like once you're pregnant. So why not dive in feet first? What do they call it? The prime muster, or the 3 months before you get pregnant.
Yeah. Yeah. Preconception.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, contact Ashley at her website, which we will have in the notes, but it is wholehealthyhappylife.com. Reach out to her there and yeah, connect with and work with her because she's obviously been through this all herself, as you've heard in this episode. So thank you so much, Ashley, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. It was awesome to get out there and share
Yeah.
my story.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing it. I know it'll touch a lot of women's hearts. So, all right, guys, I will see you next time.